A cold Monday morning at the Supreme Court of Newbridge City. No media coverage, no sensational trial, just a small file marked 47B. Disturbing the peace, trespassing, resisting a public officer, a routine case like hundreds of other names passing through the old wooden benches and then vanishing. The courtroom door opened. A thin, hunched black man walked in, his wrists loosely cuffed. He didn't look around, didn't seek out sympathetic eyes. He stepped forward beneath the cold glow of the fluorescent lights like a shadow stretched thin by time. A faded military coat, several sizes too large, hung over his frail shoulders. Every crease on his face carved a fragment of forgotten history, battlefields, separation, poverty, and silence. The clerk spoke, without lifting her head. "Please state your name." The man answered, his voice hoarse, quiet but clear. "Samuel Brooks. Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps." The courtroom remained still. No one paid much attention when a veteran stood trial for the offense of sitting too long behind a coffee shop. Only one person looked up. Judge Renee Williams was flipping through the case file from the judge's bench when her hand suddenly froze. Her eyes stopped at the bolded name on the cover, Samuel J. Brooks. Born 1954. Discharged in 2005, Unit United States Marine Corps, 2nd Battalion, 8th Regiment. In a moment, no one noticed her face turned pale. Her pen slipped from her fingers. Because she recognized that name, not from newspapers, not from the news, but from an old handwritten letter by her only brother who died in Fallujah and who once wrote, "If it weren't for Staff Sergeant Brooks that day, none of us would have survived." Below, Samuel Brooks bowed his head in silence. He had no idea this trial wasn't an end. It was the beginning of something no one could have predicted. Samuel Brooks sat quietly on the defendant's bench, his hands resting on his knees, fingers interlaced as though trying to keep himself from trembling. No one addressed him by his rank. No one asked where he had been or what he had done. To them, he was just the troublesome old man who slept behind the coffee shop. Under the courtroom's cold lighting, his grey-tinged skin showed through the worn fabric of his old military coat, its shoulder seams frayed. A coat once worn beneath flares in Fallujah now awaited judgment in a public room where people who had never heard gunfire would decide his fate. The loudspeaker blared, "Case 47B, City of Newbridge versus Samuel Brooks. Charges: disturbing the peace, unlawful trespass, resisting a public officer." Samuel stood up, slowly, very slowly. His legs were stiff as if each step had pulled behind it a decade of unhealed wounds. Vietnam in 1973, Grenada in 1983, Iraq in 2004. Each scar was a country, each pain is a comrade who never came home. The prosecutor, a young, well-groomed man with neatly trimmed hair and an expensive suit, stood up as if he had rehearsed the speech many times. The defendant, Samuel Brooks, has been repeatedly warned for lingering behind Jefferson Street Cafe. The owner filed 3 formal complaints just this month. His behavior is recurrent and defies repeated instructions. But he didn't say this. Samuel never begged, never held a sign saying "Veteran, please help." He sat tucked behind the warm steam exhaust pipe of the kitchen, the only place that could ease the sharp pain in his war-worn legs. Alone, with half a sandwich secretly left for him by Caleb the cook after his shift ended. At 11:45 p.m. that night, a police officer arrived, woke him up. "I just need 5 more minutes," Samuel had said. But his words never made it into the report. Like his entire life, every battle, every oath of loyalty never made it into any headline. In courtrooms filled with data and arguments, some lives cannot be measured by law. When a soldier sits alone on a cold night, not to protest, not to rebel, but simply because he wants to survive one more night. When the prosecutor finished his presentation, Judge Renee Williams looked down and carefully closed the case file. Her face remained stern as usual, but her hands trembled slightly. She took a deep breath. "Mr. Brooks," she spoke, her voice calm, as though nothing had just shifted inside her. "Do you have legal representation today?" Samuel shook his head. A public defender was assigned, but they were called to another room for an emergency case this morning. I have no one." The judge nodded slightly. That sentence sliced cleanly through the air, cutting straight to the core. No elaboration was needed. Everyone in the room felt the chill behind the words, "I have no one." She was about to invite him to represent himself when click. The rear courtroom doors burst open. A tall white man in a navy suit stepped in just in time. He had a leather briefcase in one hand, polished brown shoes, and a charcoal tie neatly knotted. He walked straight to the defense table, set his case down, and then turned to the judge. "Apologies for the interruption, Your Honor. My name is Christopher Hale. I've just been asked to represent Mr. Brooks." A wave of murmurs swept across the back rows. Samuel turned astonished. He had never seen this man before and hadn't called anyone. And he certainly couldn't afford an attorney in a tailored suit with silver cufflinks. Judge Renee tilted her head, her gaze sharpening. "The court has received no notice regarding a change in legal counsel. This is highly irregular." Hale remained composed. He gave a slight bow. "That's correct, Your Honor. The decision was finalized this morning. My firm, Hale & Morgan Associates, is taking on this case pro bono." Samuel frowned. His voice was soft but firm. I have no money. I didn't hire you." Christopher Hale leaned in, slightly lowering his voice. "And you won't need any." Before Mr. Brooks could respond, his eyes locked onto something behind the young attorney. On the leather briefcase was a familiar insignia that belonged to Judge Renee Williams' late husband. Same name, same symbol. The pieces began to move. In the still courtroom, it was as if an old wind had swept through the past, carrying names, promises, and an unpaid debt of justice. The door to the judge's chambers quietly clicked shut behind her. Renee Williams sat at her desk, her gaze distant for a few seconds. 20 years on the scales of justice had taught her how to maintain a calm face, a neutral tone, and hidden emotions. But now the name Samuel Brooks was no longer a defendant, no longer a homeless man. He was the man she had been trying to find for 2 decades. She opened the bottom drawer where her most private documents were kept and took out a small box. Inside was a photograph, its edges faded with time, a younger version of herself standing beside her late brother, Lieutenant Marcus Williams, during his first uniform ceremony. Marcus smiled brightly. She was standing proudly beside him. Tucked into the frame was a yellowed piece of paper, the last letter Marcus sent home from Fallujah. If not for Staff Sergeant Brooks that day, no one in the unit would have survived. He ran into gunfire like death didn't exist. He carried me out from the battlefield, then went back to save the others. Renee's hands shook. The letter stopped mid-sentence. Marcus never had the chance to finish it. 2 weeks later, he died in an IED explosion. She remembered the funeral vividly, the folded flag, the sound of taps. Her parents were frozen like statues. And then, a strange soldier stepped forward, haunted eyes, trembling voice. "Your son saved my life. I'm the one he carried back. He never came back again. But because of him, I'm still here." He never gave his name, never asked to be remembered. And then he vanished. Years later, when she finally had the means to search Renee, asked the military. The answer, Staff Sergeant Samuel Brooks re-enlisted, not long after. Diagnosed with severe PTSD. Discharged, no forwarding address. Now he was sitting outside, wearing a faded coat and surrounded by judging eyes. No one recognized him, but she did. A knock at the door pulled her out of memory. Christopher Hale stepped inside, his voice soft. "Renee, what's going on?" He was one of the few who still called her by name, a friend of her late husband. a former colleague, and now the only person she could confide in. She pushed the photo and letter forward. It's him, Chris, the man who saved Marcus, the one I've searched for these past 20 years. Christopher leaned down to read, then looked up, stunned. Mr. Brooks. He's the veteran from Marcus's file, the man who walked into court today. Renee nodded, her eyes red, but her voice unwavering. It's him. It's him. Christopher lowered his voice. Does he recognize you? I took my husband's surname after law school. After Marcus died, I changed everything. He wouldn't recognize me. So, what are you going to do now? Renee stood tall. For the first time since the case began, her voice wasn't that of a judge. It was that of a sister. I won't let him disappear again. Outside the courtroom, an old soldier still sat waiting, unaware that his life was about to enter an entirely new chapter. The courtroom was silent once again. Judge Renee Williams returned to her bench, sitting upright, expressionless. But if one looked closely, they'd notice her hands gently clenching around the case file. Christopher Hale stood up and composed, Your Honor. We respectfully move for all charges against Mr. Samuel Brooks to be dismissed. Witnesses will confirm that he was not trespassing, but merely attempting to survive in dangerous weather conditions. Furthermore, we have evidence that employees at the cafe quietly permitted him to take shelter at night. Just about to rise and object, the prosecutor didn't have time before. Hold on, Judge Renee said. She looked directly at Samuel. For the first time, the gaze of someone who knew more about the past than anyone else in the room. Mr. Brooks, your military record lists a battle in Fallujah in 2004. Is that correct? Samuel paused, then slowly stood straighter than usual. Yes, Your Honor. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. I was there. The air in the room thickened. April 17th. Renee continued, did you take part in a mission to protect a supply convoy on the city's western edge? Samuel's face showed a flicker of surprise. He blinked. Old sounds came rushing back, machine gun fire screaming the scorched smell of dirt and gunpowder. Yes, Your Honor, he answered slowly. We were ambushed. The convoy got pinned. I remember running out to pull a young officer to safety. Lieutenant Marcus Williams. His face froze. His eyes squinted, digging through 2 decades of dusty memory. That's right, young, light-skinned. He was trying to drag a wounded medic out of the line of fire. He took a bullet to the side. I ran in, pulled both of them into a trench. Samuel's voice caught. A thick silence gripped his throat. He kept yelling at me to leave him and return for the others. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave anyone behind. The gallery was dead silent. A silver-haired man in a Marine League jacket leaned forward in the second row. His eyes locked on Samuel, breath held. Renee gripped the bench tightly. So, what happened to Lieutenant Marcus Williams afterward? Her voice was nearly a whisper. Samuel bowed his head, his tone low and warm like embers. We got him onto the helicopter. I heard he made it to Germany. But a few weeks later, word came that his convoy hit a mine. I don't know the full details. His eyes clouded as if haunted by something that had never left. Sometimes I wonder if I'd left him that day. Maybe he would have survived longer. Maybe I just delayed the inevitable. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. No, you didn't delay anything. You saved our lives. I know, I was there. All heads turned. A silver-haired man stood upright, his voice slicing through doubt. I'm Sergeant Dan Price. That day, Samuel Brooks saved 6 of us. 6 lives we can never repay. He ran into the fire shouting, pulling each of us out. Not for medals, not for anything but life. A quiet shock rippled through the courtroom. No applause, no cheering. Just a sacred silence, the kind Samuel had never received since the day he left the service. Judge Renee Williams tapped her gavel lightly, not to restore order, but to keep herself from breaking down. because she knew this was only the beginning. The entire courtroom was frozen after Sergeant Dan Price's declaration. No one spoke, no one moved. Armed with pages of arguments, even the prosecutor stood silently, the open file in his hands, now unreadable. Judge Renee Williams adjusted her glasses, though her hand trembled slightly. She took a long, deep breath. "This court will recess for 10 minutes, she announced. But just as she began to rise, something completely unexpected happened. The rear doors of the courtroom opened once more. 3 soldiers entered in full uniform, walking with solemn composure and focused eyes. A colonel, a master sergeant, and a young corporal were carefully carrying a polished wooden box trimmed in brass, with the national seal engraved on its lid. Whispers stirred among the courtroom audience. No one knew what was happening, only that Samuel Brooks stood upright, instinctively straighter than he had in decades. No order was given, no command was spoken. It was instinct, blood, history. Renee Williams looked at him, then turned to the courtroom. She held no file. Her face no longer wore neutrality. For the first time in her career, she did not speak as a judge, but as a sister. "Before we proceed, I need to share something personal, directly connected to this case." Her eyes locked onto Samuel. "Lieutenant Marcus Williams, the man you mentioned in your testimony, was my younger brother." The room seemed to lose all air. 20 years ago, my family received Marcus's last letter. In it, he wrote about a soldier who saved his life. A man who ran into enemy fire without hesitation, without fear. Marcus called you the embodiment of courage. He later volunteered for a mission because he wanted to live like you. Her voice trembled but remained steady. Tears quietly gathered at the corners of her eyes. "I searched for you, but the military said you had severe PTSD and then you disappeared. No one knew where you went. No one even knew if you were alive." She turned toward the colonel. "This is Colonel David Morgan, Marcus's commanding officer. He has something to say." Colonel Morgan stepped forward, posture firm as steel eyes locked onto Samuel, Staff Sergeant Samuel Brooks. "Over the past 2 years, the Department of Defense has conducted a comprehensive review of unrecognized acts of valor. Your case was placed in the highest priority group." He nodded to the corporal. "Bebusil." The wooden box was opened. Inside was the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration in the United States Armed Forces, just below the Medal of Honor. Resting on dark blue velvet, it gleamed like a blade drawn from the shadows. "By order of the Secretary of the Navy," the colonel declared, "the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Samuel J. Brooks for heroic action on April 17, 2004 in Fallujah. You not only saved Lieutenant Marcus Williams and 5 other Marines, but you also prevented an ambush that could have wiped out the entire supply convoy." The courtroom gasped. Many people raised their hands to their mouths. A few young soldiers nodded quietly, their eyes brimming. Samuel stood still. Saying nothing, he looked at the medal, then turned away, as if its light was too blinding. "There must be some mistake," he whispered. "I only did what I had to do." Colonel Morgan did not waver. "There is no mistake, Sergeant. And what you had to do is exactly what most others never dare to." A voice rose from the back row. "Attention on deck." Sergeant Dan Price stood at attention, hand raised in salute. And then, like a wave rippling outward, one by one, veterans, witnesses, even the court stenographer, stood and raised their hands to salute Samuel Brooks. The entire courtroom rose. Not because the law required it, but to pay tribute to a soldier who had long been forgotten. Judge Renee Williams could not hold back her tears. She raised the gavel. "In light of undeniable evidence and unassailable honor, I declare that all charges against Mr. Samuel Brooks are dismissed completely and permanently." The gavel struck. But this time not to pass judgment, but to restore dignity. The trial was over. But the room did not empty. On the contrary, it felt fuller, heavier, and saturated with a silence that could only be described by two words: reverence and truth. Samuel Brooks stood in the center of the room, not speaking, not bowing, or daring to breathe deeply. He looked like a survivor standing amid the ruins, unsure how to react, when for the first time he was truly seen. As Judge Renee Williams stepped down from the bench, Master Sergeant Daniel Price approached him. No grand words, just a simple gesture as he handed Samuel a tablet. "Sir, we've tried to reach you for years to update your veteran records. Today I'm here to confirm in person you have been reassessed with a 100% disability rating directly related to military service." And, he paused, letting the room absorb what came next, all benefits, including lifetime medical coverage, housing assistance, psychological support, education funds, and most importantly back pay from your discharge until today will be fully awarded. Samuel blinked. I don't quite understand. Does that mean? It means, the sergeant said gently, that your country finally acknowledges you, not just with words, but with action. Christopher Hale stepped in, voice firm. "My law firm will oversee every step. No more delays, no more heartless bureaucracy. Every right, no matter how small, you will receive." At that moment, another man stepped forward from the courtroom. His eyes glistened, his hand clutching an old chef's hat. Caleb Mitchell, the cook who once left half a sandwich behind the cafe, couldn't hold back any longer. He walked up to Samuel, his hands shaking. "I didn't know. I truly didn't know until today," Caleb stammered. "My dad served in Iraq. He once told me, if you ever meet a man named Samuel Brooks, owe him everything." His voice broke. "Turns out, that man is you." He extended his hand. Not to give money, not to offer gifts, to shake the hand of a man who had once been invisible. The prosecutor was the last to approach, who had used the very system to charge Samuel. He couldn't meet Samuel's eyes, but his voice tried to hold steady. "Sir, I didn't know. I was wrong. About everything. And I know an apology isn't enough. But please, accept this sincere apology." Samuel looked at him. Longer than necessary, but then he nodded, gently. No resentment, no triumph, only the quiet fatigue of a man who had walked through too many battlefields and now only wanted to sit down. And then in the pale light of a winter afternoon, the courtroom that once labeled him a criminal became the first place, where Samuel Brooks was finally called by his actual name. The courtroom had emptied. People slowly filed out in silence as if departing a memorial service. But Samuel Brooks remained standing among the worn wooden benches, not in a hurry, not speaking. The look in his eyes wasn't that of a man who had just won. It was the gaze of a soldier who had finally completed his mission. Suddenly footsteps descended from the high bench. Judge Renee Williams no longer wore her robe. She stepped down as a human being, no longer behind the veil of office, no longer behind the wall between law and feeling. She stopped before him, her hand resting gently on the wooden railing. Samuel looked at her as if seeing a stranger, but then his eyes settled on her face. Something in it felt familiar. A memory from 20 years ago resurfaced: the funeral, tears, a young woman standing beside the coffin, and a folded flag. She was the girl in the photograph. "That day," Renee said softly, her voice trembling yet clear, "my brother told our family about you, about how you ran into the gunfire, how you defied orders to pull him back, and how you said, 'No one gets left behind, not while I still breathe.'" Samuel bowed his head. "That line," he whispered. "I said it to Marcus. Never thought anyone remembered." Renee shook her head, her eyes misty but glowing. "We never forgot. You kept that promise to Marcus, and today America keeps that promise to you." Then she took a step back, standing tall. Her voice became strong, no longer trembling. no longer marked by tears. Staff Sergeant Samuel Brooks, we do more than dismiss charges today. We recognize your honor, not because you needed forgiveness, but because we needed forgiveness for getting you for far too long. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small object. An old dog tag is worn down, the name is barely legible, and a few letters remain: S.J. Brooks. After the Battle of Fallujah, this was found in Marcus's armor. He kept it for the rest of his life. My family kept it for the last 20 years, and now I believe it belongs to you. Samuel took it. His hands trembled, but he didn't drop it. He looked at the small piece of metal as if he had just recovered a part of himself that had long been lost. Not metal, not glory, but the final proof that he had once existed was that he had been someone trusted, respected, and remembered with gratitude. No flags were needed, no national anthem, just one simple truth. Today you are no longer forgotten. 2 weeks had passed since Samuel Brooks walked out of the courtroom, not as a homeless defendant, but as a soldier finally acknowledged. Now he lived in a small, quiet apartment within the Veterans Housing Complex, where for the first time in decades he no longer woke up startled by sirens or the cutting cold. White walls, a small wooden cabinet, not many possessions, just one framed display mounted neatly on the wall, the Navy Cross. 2 long-lost Purple Hearts recovered and returned by Attorney Hale, and in the center, the old dog tag bearing his name tied forever to someone who never returned. Samuel was adjusting the position of the framed medals when there was a knock at the door. He opened it. Judge Renee Williams stood there, not in robes but as a humble woman, with her hair tied back and a small box in her hands. "May I come in?" she asked gently. "Just call me Samuel," he replied, offering a rare smile. "Then I'm Renee," she said, with a smile, stepping inside. The apartment was small, but not stifling, just quiet, as if it were listening. They sat across from each other. One was a former soldier, and the other was the sister of a fallen officer. No words were exchanged at first, none were needed. Renee opened the box. "I brought something." Inside was a bundle of old letters tied together with a faded paracord string. Letters written by Marcus from the battlefield, sent home to family, preserved for 20 years. Marcus wrote us every week. But some letters, I think you should be the first to read. She handed him one. The paper was yellowed, but the handwriting was still firm. "Mom, Dad, I'm okay. Yesterday we were ambushed escorting the supply convoy. Some men got hurt, but it didn't become a disaster thanks to one man. His name is Staff Sergeant Brooks. He ran through gunfire like the rain meant nothing. He pulled me out of a trench when I couldn't lift my arms anymore. When I told him to save someone else, he said, 'No one gets left behind. Not while I still breathe.' I've never met anyone like him. Not just a commander, but an example. If someday I can live even half the way he does, I'll know I've lived right." Samuel was silent. His hand trembled slightly as he folded the letter. "I used to think, maybe saving Marcus only delayed his death. That I failed him," he said softly. Renee shook her head, her gaze deep and unwavering. "He died on a mission he volunteered for, and he lived like a soldier like you did. Marcus didn't die because of you. He lived the way he did because of you." Samuel turned away, eyes moist. "I'm not a hero." "That's what every hero says," Renee said gently, "and they're always wrong." They sat in silence, in that small apartment, between the years lost and the words never said. Snow began to fall outside the window flakes, drifting gently across the streets. It was as if life itself were trying to erase the old footprints and invite new steps forward. The room remained still, just the soft crackle of the heater. Renee and Samuel sat there, 2 people from different worlds, once divided by war, death, and forgetting. But today, no one was playing a role. No more the old soldier once arrested, no more chief judge. Just one who saved a brother, and one who had buried that debt for 2 decades. Renee placed her hand on the bundle of old letters as if trying to pass through them a truth that words alone could never carry. "There's something I have never told anyone," she said quietly, her tone steady but heavy. "The day Marcus died, he wasn't ordered on that mission. He volunteered. He knew the risks, knew the target was being hunted. But he signed up anyway." Samuel looked up, puzzled. "Why would he—" "The last letter Marcus ever wrote," Renee said, pulling out another. "He wrote, 'I want to live in a way that honors the man who saved me. If I can't stand up for others, then the life I've been given is just a cowardice drawn out.'" Samuel sat in silence. 20 years. He had carried the weight of what he thought was a mistake. If I hadn't saved him that day, maybe he'd still be alive. But now the truth had a voice. He hadn't sent Marcus to his death. He had given Marcus a reason to live with purpose. And Marcus had chosen with honor. Samuel leaned back into the chair. His eyes looked out the window. Snow blanketed the rooftops. "I lived on the street for nearly 15 years. Every night on the sidewalk, I kept thinking, no one remembers. No one knows who I am or what I did. Everything felt like it vanished." He sighed. "And then I started believing maybe I never existed." Renee was quiet for a while. Then she placed her hand on his shoulder, gently, warmly, with sincerity. "No, you didn't disappear. No one truly disappears if they've planted courage in someone else's heart. And you did that, for Marcus, for me, and for this whole country." Samuel didn't reply immediately. He turned to her, eyes glossy but no tears falling. "Thank you for remembering my name." He said it. Very softly, but it was something he hadn't told in 20 years. Renee smiled and stood up. "Marcus once told me the worth of a soldier isn't in the medals they receive in public, but in what they do when no one is watching. Today you no longer live in the dark, because the whole world has seen." The door closed softly behind her. Samuel sat there, alone, but not lonely. His hand gripped the worn dog tag. On the wall, the light from the Navy cross glinted across the white paint. For the first time, not because of glory, but because his name had been called. Early morning. Pale sunlight slipped through the white curtains of a second-floor apartment in the Veterans Housing Complex. Samuel Brooks sat in front of a mirror. He was no longer the homeless man with a torn backpack and a cold cup of coffee. No longer the trembling shadow hiding in a dark winter alley. He wore a clean shirt buttoned up. On the table beside him sat a small photo frame capturing the ceremony at the courthouse where he was awarded the Navy Cross. There were no reporters, no live broadcasts, but that photo for him was proof of one thing: he had lived, fought, he had fought, and he had not been forgotten. A soft knock echoed at the door. Samuel stepped out and opened it. It was Renee. Today she brought no letters, files, or memories boxed in cardboard. Just herself, a regular woman with 2 cups of hot coffee and a genuine smile. "I thought, it's chilly this morning, so that you might need an extra cup," she said. "I never turn down coffee," Samuel replied, half joking, his voice deep and warm. They sat by the window, watching young people pass by below. Some were officer cadets, some carried backpacks stitched with the American flag. Renee spoke softly. "The state's Veterans Support Program is undergoing reforms. They're reviewing cases like yours. Your story has reached Congress. I heard there's a committee now called the Brooks Bill." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Named after me?" "Yes," Renee smiled. "We figured it's time to use the names of those forgotten, to protect those on the verge of being forgotten." He let out a chuckle, not proud, not boastful, just the smile of a man who had finally been heard. Renee stood, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. "Marcus used to say, a hero isn't the one who climbs the highest podium. It's the one who silently holds others up so they don't fall. I believe You've done that your whole life." Samuel remained quiet. Then he lifted his head. His gaze was steady and his posture was straighter than ever. "I don't need anyone building statues of me," he said. "I just need one thing. Remember my name. And don't let anyone like me wait a lifetime to be called by the right name." That day he stepped outside. The sun was shining. He wore an old baseball cap with a small Marine Corps pin. No one looked at him as a homeless man anymore. A young boy walking by looked up and asked his father, "Daddy, who's that man?" The father answered, "That's the man who kept the promise America nearly forgot. His name is Samuel Brooks." And in that moment, on a crowded street in everyday life, he smiled. No need for glory, no need for flashbulbs. Just a child who knew his name, because there are heroes who don't need medals to shine. They need to be seen and to be called by their rightful name.